We're halfway through the 6th chapter of Shekalim, and we've done the 13 prostrations, the 13 chests, the 13 gates. But we're now going to come back actually to the chests, or we will in a minute. But before we do that, we're just going to touch on the obligations of people who make promises. So I would say in general, we're in the realm of promises and commitments. In a minute, before the end of this evening, we'll go into lost objects. Just as at the end of Pesachim, we got into questions about what happened when things got mixed up and things got confused. There's a sequence of Mishnayot at the end of Shekalim about things that get lost. So maybe there's a connection between obligations and losses, but we're going to start off anyway with obligations, and then we'll get into the chests. So the Mishnah begins, Omer harei alei eitzim lo ifchot mishnei gizrin. Someone who says, I'm going to bring wood. This is someone who makes a commitment to bring wood. This is to bring wood to the temple. Someone who says, I'm going to bring wood. Someone who makes a commitment can't bring less than 2 logs, 2 bits of wood. So we're saying, if you make a commitment in general, this is the sort of quantity that's required to fulfill a commitment. Levona lo yifchot mikomets. If he commits to bring frankincense, he can't bring less than a handful. A handful would be taken by the priest and put onto the offering. Zahav lo yifchot midinar zahav. If he commits to bring gold, to fulfill that commitment, he can't bring less than a golden dinar. And then now we get back into the chests. Shisha li nadavar. Remember that of the chests, there were 13 chests. And the Mishnah told us that 6 of them were labeled. On six chests were labeled free will offerings. And the Mishnah is going to ask, Nadavar me hayu osimba, what was done with these free will offerings? And it answers its own question. Look, chin ba'olot habasar lashem ve'orot lakonim. They buy with them burnt offerings, the flesh for God, i.e., that the flesh would burn on the altar, ve'orot lakonim, and the hides for the priests. So the burnt offerings, in some senses, were split between God and man. The flesh burnt on the altar. The thing about an olah, by the way, is it's completely burnt. But the hides could be taken for the priests. And that's a puzzle, because for many burnt offerings, it all has to be burnt. And the Mishnah is going to bring a midrash. Zeh midrash darash Yehoiada Kohen Gadol. This is a midrash which was drushed, which was expounded by Yehoiada the high priest. And he brings a verse from Vayikra. Asham hu Ashom Asham Lashem. Let me show, I brought the whole verse from Vayikra on the source sheet actually just below. Let's just have a look at this. Ve'im nefesh, it's from the beginning of Vayikra, it's the parsha actually of Vayikra. And it goes through the various sacrifices and it gets onto sin offerings. Ve'im nefesh ki techta, if a person sin ve'asta achat mikol mitzvot Hashem, and does any things which are forbidden, asher lo te'asena, if he doesn't know, he bears his iniquity, and he brings this offering. And the Pusukim end, Asham hu. It is a guilt offering. Ashom Asham Lashem. He has, Ashom Asham is a participle, it's a double participle form. It means emphasis. He has surely sinned against the Lord. So the word Asham is repeated 3 times. Asham hu, Ashom Asham Lashem. And the high priest is going to drush this pasuk. Asham hu, Ashom Asham Lashem, zeh haklal. This is the principle. Kol shehu ba mishum chet u mishum ashma yilakach bo olot habasar lashem ve'orot lakonim. So the midrash goes, it's a guilt offering. any guilt offering, this is the general rule, anything which is brought because of a sin or because of guilt, they should purchase with it burnt offerings. The flesh goes to God and the hides for the priests. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, Nimtzu shnei ketuvim kayamim. And that means two verses are both fulfilled. Asham Lashem, that's the verse that we've got. The Asham goes to God. It doesn't go to the priests. But we have actually a verse from 2 Kings, which suggests that the money which was deposited for guilt offerings did go to the priests. So we do have a suggestion in 2 Kings, in Melachim Bet, that the money did go to the Kohanim. So the second verse, Ve'omer kesef asham v'chesef chatot lo yuva beit Hashem la kohanim hiu. Money brought as a guilt offering or a sin offering was not deposited in the house of the Lord. And maybe this is a connection with the chests. It didn't go into the chests. La kohanim yu, it went to the priests. It's as if the priests got some, it's as if this money was paid over to the priests, at least according to Melachim Bet. And of course, if we have a critical view on this, we could say, look, maybe the practice in the time of Melachim Bet was different from the practice in the time of Moshe or in the time of Yehoiada, the Kohen. Maybe there was different practice, but Yehoiada, the Kohen Gadol, seems to want to integrate these 2 Pesukim. So he wants to say, look, the Asham is for God, so part of it's for God, but part of it is for the priests. So we're happy with both Pesukim. We split it, the flesh one way and the hides the other way. Or if you want to learn it a different way, you could say, look, that the most of the money was spent on burnt offerings, but the leftovers was spent on offerings that could be partially given to the priests. And that's how chapter 6 closes. And then chapter 7 of the Mishnah of Shekalim then begins with this list of things which are lost, but things which were found. So when something is found in Jerusalem, well, what do you do with it? Ma'ot shenimtzu bein hashkalim li nedava. So we've got our list of chests, right? And what if we find some coins on the ground between the shekel chest and the free will offering chests? Remember, the shekel chests were the first ones mentioned, and the free will offerings ones were the last mentioned. Actually, one of the suggestions in the Bar Tanura is that they were arranged in a circle. Otherwise, how could a coin be between the first and the last? Unless, of course, if they're arranged in a circle, in which case the first and last will be next to one another. Of course, our Mishnah, when it enumerated the 13 chests, didn't say anything about how they were organized. So there's no reason to question this Mishnah particularly. So coins are found, they're lying on the ground, they're between the shekels chest and the free will offerings chest. So what are we going to do with them? In principle, we're probably going to throw them into one of the chests. But which one do we choose? So the Mishnah explains, if we find it nearer to the shekels chest, they go to the shekels. If we find them nearest to the free will offerings, they go into the free will offerings chest. Fine. That seems pretty rational. What if they're halfway between? What if we don't know? If they're halfway between, they go into free will offerings, because free will offerings we're going to buy a lot with those offerings. They seem to take precedence, and we'll see this pattern goes on. Between the wood chest and the frankincense chest. Karov laitzim, yiplu laitzim. If it's near to the wood chest, goes to wood. La lavona, yiplu lavona. If it's near to the frankincense chest, they go to frankincense. Mertza la mertza, yiplu la lavona. It goes to the frankincense rather than to the wood. And we can see this intuitively. The frankincense is actually offered on the altar. The wood is only for burning something else which is offered on the altar. So again, we start to see the theme here. Bein kinim legos leolah, between nests and young pigeons. Nests are nests of turtle doves that someone with a mission needs to bring. That is to say, they bring the turtle doves, not the nests. Bein kinim legos leolah, between nests and young pigeons for burnt offerings. Karov lakinim yiplu lakinim, near to nests they go to nests. Legos leolah yiplu legos leolah, near to young pigeons for burnt offerings, they go to young pigeons for burnt offerings. Mechza lemechza, what if they fall right in between? Yiplu legos leolah, they go to the burnt offerings. Similarly, Bein chulin lemaaser sheni, between non-consecrated money and maaser sheni. Now here, this is really interesting. We're not in a temple anymore, because there wasn't a chest for ordinary non-consecrated money, and there wasn't a chest for maaser sheni. So we've segued, we've morphed. We're outside Jerusalem now, and we're in a household where there are two chests. Maybe there are two collecting boxes. Maybe there are two tzedakah boxes, right, sitting in this house. And they're next to one another. And one is just ordinary tzedakah. It's chulin, it's non-consecrated. And the other is maaser sheni. It's dedicated to the second tithe, and we need to eat it in holiness in Jerusalem. Maaser sheni has to be eaten in Jerusalem. So we've got these two tzedakah boxes. We've got these two chests. They're in our house, and someone finds a coin on the ground between the two chests. Well, what are we going to do with it? If it's near to non-consecrated, to chulin, they go to non-consecrated. L'maser sheni, plu l'maser sheni. If it's near to maaser sheni, they go to maaser sheni. Mechza l'mechza, we're going to follow the same principle. If in doubt, we're going to give it towards the more holy. So mechza l'mechza, if it's in the middle, yiplu l'maser sheni. If it's in the middle, we're going to put it in the maaser sheni box rather than in the non-consecrated box. And the Mishnah finishes zeh haklal. This is the principle. Holchin achar hakarov. In general, the principle is that we go to the nearest box, the nearest chest. And this now applies, remember, whether we're in Jerusalem in the temple or whether we're outside. We go to the nearest box. And the text, by the way, I've given you here is from the Kaufman. The printed text is slightly different, but this is what Kaufman tells us. We go to the nearest one. Mechza l'mechza l'hachmir. If it's in the middle, we are stringent, i.e., we put it to the purpose, if you like, which is most restrictive. We put it to the holiest, it's the most, we allocate it to the most restrictive purpose. Now, if that's the case for money found on the ground, and remember, we're now going to deal with a whole sequence of issues to do with lost and found. We are really in, if you like, the lost and found department of the temple now. What if we find some money in front of an animal dealer? Now we are back in Jerusalem. Le'olam ma'aser. It's always going to be second tithe money. Why is that? Well, if we're in Jerusalem and we're in front of an animal dealer, I think the Mishnah is assuming that anyone who spends money with an animal dealer in Jerusalem essentially is spending second tithe money. So the distance is too far for them to bring an animal to Jerusalem. So they've brought their second tithe in money, and then when they get to Jerusalem, they're going to buy something with it. And they're going to do this even outside the regular foot festivals. If they've got too much second tithe money, they'll leave it with their friends or with their relatives to spend in Jerusalem, because that money can't be taken out of Jerusalem. So the Mishnah assumes that people are buying animals all through the year with second tithe money. And if we find money in front of an animal dealer, that's second tithe. But The Mishnah continues, B'harabayit chulin. If we find that money on Temple Mount, it's actually chul. It's non-sacred and it's counterintuitive. And the Rambam, I think, comments that no priest is going to be dealing in sacred money. If he takes money, for example, out of the treasury, he'll exchange it for animals. So we don't, obviously there's sacred money inside the treasury, but if it's outside, we expect it to be non-sacred. And then the Mishnah continues, because the rule won't always be consistent. B'Yerushalayim b'Shata Regel. What about in Jerusalem, so in the city, not in the temple, at the time of a festival? B'Yerushalayim b'Shata Regel, Maaser. If we find the money in Jerusalem during a festival, we assume it's second-type money. Uvishar kol yemot hashana chulin. And in the rest of the days of the year, we assume it's non-consecrated, i.e., we go after the most normal, the most regular occurrence. Because in general, if we find money in Jerusalem not during a festival, and this is assuming it's not in front of an animal dealer, by the way, we assume it's non-consecrated and we give it that status.